Happy week, everybody. This week we are going to answer a reader question from Cynthia Smith. But first off, if you're new to Tonya Answers a Reader's Question, what it's all about is readers send me questions. And you can sign up for my newsletter down below. And there's a form on my newsletter where you can send in questions. And I answer them. So it's just as easy as that. So I hope you enjoy this question, again, from Cynthia Smith. She asked, what was your career path from college through to being a full-time writer? Readers often think that there's a magical formula and that our favorite writers have always been published, self-supporting writers. I think that'd be interesting to hear about your journey. That's a great question, Cynthia. And so I graduated from the University of Kentucky many years ago. And I'm talking about in the 80s, late or early, 90. So anyways, let's see, when did I graduated in 93. So anyway, what happened is I was trying to think back because I also went back and got another degree, which we'll talk about. That's part of the question or the answer. So what happened was that I graduated in education from the University of Kentucky, and I lived in my small hometown of Nicholasville for a couple of years doing that. And then I got married, and after that I moved to northern Kentucky from Nicholasville, which is right outside of Lexington, so it's about 2 hours north, and decided that I didn't want to be a teacher, so I went back and got a degree in child therapy, and I did that for many years and loved it. I still keep in touch with some of my families today that I worked with. But anyways, I worked with children that had special needs. So I worked with children that had like cerebral palsy or seizures, ADHD, and as to autism. Also, I worked with children that had simple things like they had delayed speech, but by the time we were finished, so I was certified, still certified in physical therapy, speech therapy, occupational therapy. I was what you call a developmental therapist. So I did all areas, and if a child needed more in one area than the other, but had a need in two areas, then I would call in just a speech therapist or just an occupational therapist or a physical therapist to help with my therapy. So I did that for many years, and then through my book club and my husband's encouragement and their encouragement of me being able to tell a story verbally, that had encouraged me one night, that book club, and said, you should write a book. And of course I'm thinking, I couldn't write a book, but books had actually saved my life from a few years of a depression that I had gone through after a divorce, which was the first marriage that brought me to northern Kentucky. So divorce was something I wasn't planning on, and so I was a little sad about that. And so I found a loss of time through books. And so that's how I thought, well, if I could change one reader's day, I don't care if their day is happy, sad, depressed, just the best day could be, if I had one reader that could escape into my world and my stories, then that has fulfilled my purpose. So what happened, Cynthia, was that going back to the book club, they encouraged me to tell a story, which ended up being a fictitious story that I actually wrote in my first book. The true story I turned into fiction. But I do have to say that the night that they encouraged me to write, my husband was sleeping, Eddie was sleeping, and I woke up at midnight, and all my kids were in middle school or high school, and so I'm older, and so what happened was that I woke my husband up at midnight and said, honestly, do you think I could write a book and have one reader escape? And he said, yeah, I do. And I'm like, okay, go back to bed. So 3 of my kids were in actually elementary school, and Cody, I believe, was in middle school. So Yeah, they were actually, see, time flies. But anyway, so the smaller kids, the three of them were in Pee Wee football, and you couldn't leave football because they might get hurt. So I sat under an oak tree looking the Ohio River on the Kentucky side with pen and paper, because at the time didn't have a laptop, didn't have anything, and so I bought a notebook from Walgreens, and I wrote pen and paper, started my first story. So I did that for about 7 years. I wrote, and I had no idea about publishing. I had no idea that you needed an agent or an editor at the time, and self-publishing was not an arm. And so I joined a writers group, a local writers group. I also did things, I tried to do every kind of class I could do. I started a blog so I could gain readers when I didn't even have a reader. So I was smart enough to know that I would have a reader base when my first book came out. So I did that. And then I had a publishing contract. I couldn't believe it. And it was with a small publisher, but we ended up parting ways. And so I got upset, and that's when self-publishing was still a taboo. And it was a taboo at the time. This has been 10, 11 or so years ago. And so my husband had a Sony e-reader, which is no longer out. And Eddie said, why don't you self-publish? And I'm like, oh, okay. So I went to that writers group that I belonged to, and I told them I was self-publishing, and they kicked me out. They said that I was not representative of the writing community and that it was fake. So I kind of got mad, and I got me a cup of coffee and drove home. I got a cup of coffee from the White Castle from the meeting, and I drove home, and I called Eddie on my cell phone, and I said, learn to format, because we're going to self-publish. So I found somebody, I paid somebody that was an editor with a publishing firm on the side, and I found somebody that could do a graphic for me just for an e-cover. And Eddie and I started our publishing journey together. We are a business. He is as much part of the business as I am as the author. And so we never looked back. So what happened was, years later, I had written a book called Ghostly Undertaking, and I have a cover of that. Hold on. So this is the self-published cover of Ghostly Undertaking, and I sold a lot of copies. I'm talking like 80,000 copies of this one book. So then I got some interest from HarperCollins, and that's a huge publisher in New York who I absolutely adore and love. And after I had gotten some fun information about them, then I thought, well, now I probably need to get an agent. So I queried my favorite agent that I'd been looking at and said, this is the deal. And so we inked a deal with HarperCollins, and they turned this book into this series. So that is how I got into traditional publishing. And since then, I've kept one foot in traditional publishing and one foot out of traditional publishing. So I started getting contracts, and I realized that my passion for writing was taking over my business for therapy. So Eddie and I had a long conversation about 7 years ago. Has it been 7 years? Yeah. Time flies, because my kids now are all in college or out of college. I got 2 out of college and 2 in college. One's a senior and one's a junior this year, so soon they'll all be out of college. None of them live at home. And so I started taking, I guess 7 years ago, I started taking contracts. And so these contracts are for publishers that give you deadlines, and I was writing my stuff that I self-publish, and I was writing stuff for traditional traditional publishers. So I was on all these deadlines, and I was finding that although the income wasn't that great, I was finding that I was not having time to follow my passion. And luckily, I have a very supportive husband. Eddie's great, and he encouraged me that maybe I should stop my therapy job and write full time. So that's what I did. And then all these years later, here I am, 6 books, coming up on 57 books published, and still loving it. I love it every day. And every time I get a reader email that tells me that I helped them through something, or they just laughed, or they love my characters and they giggle, that is that one reader. It's not to do with the income I make. It's not anything to do with how many books I put out. It's just the one reader. If I could make one reader smile and happy, then I'm fulfilled every day, and it still brings me joy after all of these years, which has been like 11 or so years that I've been publishing. So I hope that answered your question, Cynthia. I look forward to taking more questions from more readers, and be sure that you fill out the form, and I'll put not only my newsletter link but also the form to fill out. Also, if you're a Cozy Mystery reader, I have my own Cozy Mystery journal that helps you keep track of all of your Cozy Mysteries that you read throughout the year. So I hope you take advantage of that and you download that. Anyways, I hope you have a fabulous day, you guys, and have a fabulous week. And be sure to like this post and subscribe to my YouTube channel, so every time I post another video, you will get a notice. I appreciate everything, and I love all of y'all. Talk to you later. Bye.